Hello, welcome to Friday's lesson. Today we are talking about peak poses and how to sequence your class around a peak pose. So this is actually truly where our sequencing begins. Once you sit down and say, how do I want to plan my class? It's great to start with a peak pose or a theme or a muscle group. Today we're talking about peak poses. Next week we'll get into combining that with our themes, or the week after, whenever. So this is really about 2/3 of the way into our class. You have a peak pose or a bigger pose or something that might be a little bit more challenging for you and for the class. My general rule of thumb is that when I do a peak pose in a group of people, I would say half or less are actually able to do the pose itself. So it's something that should be a challenge and also something that you can modify and give a lot of variations for. So peak poses, I have a whole list in the PDF. There's things like mermaid pose, dancer pose, camel pose, a deep twist, bird of paradise, and some of those you've maybe not even heard of before or have never even tried, and that's okay. And if you wanted to look up, maybe you have a pose from an Instagram yogi or something that you see is really cool, then breaking down what it takes to get in that pose. If you're a teacher, you can teach poses that you don't know how to do, but I would recommend at least knowing how to explain how to get into them or having someone be able to demo it so that others are able to see. So instead of just saying, well, I don't know how to do this pose, but you can try it, that's not really a good way to do it. And chances are you're probably stronger than a lot of other people in your classes, so there's no need to get super fancy doing poses you don't know how to do. Your peak pose could actually be pretty simple too, like a deep forward fold or lotus pose. This is a hard one, is even a peak pose. So I'm going to show you a couple of peak poses. I'm not super warmed up, but I've got enough in me to show you some possible peak poses and how we can work into them. So like I said, if you're looking for a hip opening, some possible peak poses would be lotus. That could be one. We could do fire log, which is a lot like lotus, except your legs are stacked one over the other. Other hip openers, tortoise pose, where we've got wide legs, hands are underneath, and it's a deep forward fold, and you're smushed to the floor. These are seated ones. King pigeon pose, so if you're doing pigeon pose here and decide to grab your leg or even deep back bend, grab the foot or a strap. Let's see, those are some hip opening ones. And then, we've also got, this one's always fun, bird of paradise. We have to know how to get into it. Bird of paradise. And how to get out of it. And you should move slow into these and give lots of variations. You could do splits. Splits as your peak pose. You could do arm balances. Sometimes it's even crow pose. If you notice my t-shirt, it says, this is my handstand shirt. Handstand could be a peak pose, but honestly, there's not a whole lot involved with handstand. Just like any arm balances, you'll warm up a lot with the shoulders and the back and the chest and the core and abs to get yourself ready for an arm balance. So this being said, you can pick a peak pose for your class and never actually get to the peak pose. I've done this before where I pick a theme or a muscle group or something we want to do, and the students in class or myself maybe really I'm not feeling that pose, or we didn't have enough time to get there. So we do the poses or we do a sequence that leads up to it, but we don't do it. We actually skip it entirely and move on. But we're prepping as if you were going to do the pose maybe in a future class. So you're getting the muscles ready for that peak pose. So looking at your peak pose, let's just say you chose to do hip opening, where today's peak pose is going to be lotus or fire log. Let's say fire log. So you're doing this deep hip opening on the outside. So in order to work backwards, now we want to think of what would be a great pose to start in if we're doing hip opening. My suggestions would either be an easy seated pose or child's pose is also going to work into the hips and all around the hip rotations. If you start, what else? Lying down, or lying down isn't really going to hit the hips if we're working on those. And so we probably want child's pose or seated pose for hip opening as we start. And then as we start to work our way into warm-ups, we might do more things such as different, like maybe we want to do some hip circles or knee to nose stuff. A gate pose is always good, so up to the side and lift for warm-up type of stuff. So thinking, okay, we're still trying to get into that deep hip opening. We want to heat and stretch the muscles around the legs. That's our focus. Of course, you want to get in the entire body, so we'll still do sun salutations if you're doing a vinyasa class or flow class. Sun salutations. But maybe in your sun salutation, you add some yoga squats. Add a squat here before you come to standing. Malasana. Before you come to standing, and reach up. And some of your standing warm-ups, we could do, let's say, like arm circles and down and up. This is a breath-based movement. Okay, so we're still getting into the hips. And so we're doing a deep external rotation of our hips if you're getting into fire log. So when you get to standing poses, think of standing poses that would work for heating up these muscles. Warrior poses are great. Even triangle, anything that's going to target the legs. Even if you wanted to add, that bird of paradise or a bound side angle, you're getting deep into this internal part here. Which itself could be a peak pose, bound side angle. Bound because your hands are bound, chest is open. So that would be a great one to do right before as you're prepping for the ground in the pigeon pose or that deep hip opener. I hope that makes sense. So your peak pose is what you're working towards, and you can pick out poses throughout all of your sequencing in order to lead up to that. Let's say we're doing a deep back bend. So today, let's change it to camel pose. You want to get into this pose here, or maybe it's like Kapotasana, where you're like way back. You're just doing a really deep back bend. A great place to start, two things. You could start in child's pose because that's a good counter pose for bending before we get up and open. You can start lying on your back because we're opening, shoulders are opening. Even placing a block right under your back gets you a little bit more chest opening. There you go. Then we come up, and as we do our warm-ups, what goes really well with back bends is some twists. So we might just do simple spinal twists, getting the core heated up and activated. And because we're doing deep back bend, we add some boat poses just for a little more ab work before we get deep into the back work. Sun salutations, of course, can help, and that's going to add a little bit of a back bend, a full body warm up. When you get into, if you're doing a deep back bend, if you're getting into your lunge and standing poses, some really great ones are just a simple lunge. So you get the hips down, even the knee down is fine. You're stretching out the hip flexor part of your leg. So getting ready and prepping so you can even add a back bend to your lunges. Then a twist. And maybe you want to do a standing balance of sorts. So lunges, so we're not moving our hips right and left. Our peak pose is a very linear, straightforward with the hands back. So we don't need hip rotations or anything. So we'll take those out of class. Of course, because we do a full body sequence, if at the end you want to add a pigeon pose or something, a hip opening that's like little or minor, we'll get into ending your sequences later. All right. So other peak poses could be arm balances, like, well, any kind of arm balance. Compass pose is always fun. This again is a deep forward fold. It's a deep hamstring stretch and hip opener. And this is getting into arm balance. That's one of my favorite classes. The sequence is up to that, but most people can't do that. And that's okay. We just do the poses that lead up to it, which is hip opening, hamstring stretching, and forward folds. But if you're doing a class, and remember this, if you're doing a class that's mostly forward folds, you don't want to just forward fold. You have to add counter poses. And that's what the topic is today. Next topic, as we move on, is after your peak pose, after really any pose, having a pose that balances you out is a nice objective to have. So after a camel pose, like I said, after this deep forward or back bend, it might be a little bit too much to fold forward, so you might just sit, add some twists, wring it out. That's even just a simple way to counter pose. If you're doing lotus pose, right here, and you're like, whoa, that's intense. The next great thing after burning these outer hips would possibly be Baddha Konasana, or getting inner thighs, or even a wide forward fold. So you're getting the opposite muscles. So to do something the opposite of that. Yes, and this is where now our sequencing really begins. So pick a peak pose, your favorite. You don't have to do the pose, but pick the pose, and then we break it down. What do you need to stretch and strengthen throughout the beginning of class in order to get to this point? What starting pose do we need? What are some simple warm-ups that would be helpful for this specific pose? Your standing series can be, pretty plain and everything. Like, it can just be lunges and warrior poses, but maybe add a couple things that help enhance it. So like if you're doing lots of back bends, you'll add some hands behind the back in some of your lunges. If you're doing arm balances or anything, maybe some eagle arms so that you're stretching the shoulders. And if you're preparing for a big balance pose on your feet, you might do a couple little balance poses to start with. Hope that makes sense. This is how I have been sequencing my classes for, I think, ever since the very beginning. And this is how I've also heard a lot of people have great success in their sequencing. And it's the easiest way to sequence a class on the fly. If you go person by person and you ask them what they're struggling with, or if they have any pains or issues in their body, they'll tell you. Today I had 4 people in class. I had a lot of lower back, neck, someone with a knee thing, but they knew how to modify. So people's low backs were sore and their necks were sore. So of course I made sure to add some back extensions and some simple twists so that they feel a little bit better. And if you have someone saying they really want to work on hips, or if you get suggestions from people, or if something you personally just think it would be fun to work on, back bends, twists, hip opening, just pick a pose and say, hey, today we're going to lead up to this pose. Enjoy it. You don't have to show them. I've done it before where I get into class and I say, today we're going to lead, we have a class that leads up to grasshopper pose. You guys may not know what grasshopper pose is, but that's okay. We'll see it when it comes, and we're going to be here about 2/3 of the way in class. Know that it's always optional to do that peak pose, and I'll give you lots of modifications and variations around it. And like I said, for the most part, about half the students or more can't do the full expression of the pose. But the best thing about yoga is it is meant to challenge you and to bring you to a place to find peace within that space that it's hard. And the peak pose is a minute of your life tops. So it's not like your full class, but it's there for you. If you're doing this in your home practice for yourself, pick a pose that you are struggling with. And as much as you don't want to do it, it's going to help push you to get stronger and to push beyond those limits. And that can be more challenging when you're at home by yourself. But again, try it, see how it feels, and work with it. Keep working at it. All right, what other peak poses are there? I had a whole list. If you have questions about what the pose is that I'm talking about, I can post some pictures, or I can share with you, or give you the Sanskrit name of it. I don't often speak in Sanskrit. I like to just talk to the body and tell it how to move and where to move and how to work. So I'd rather speak English terms because most of my students speak English, not necessarily Sanskrit, although Sanskrit can be fun sometimes. But make sure that you're talking in your own language too, so that people know what's going on, instead of, all right, everybody, Ekapada Kundinyasana number 2. Go. Ready? No. Tirang Mukha Ekapada Paschimottanasana. Go. You see my dog? She's like, what are you saying? That's the expression that you would have, or your students would have too. Okay. Nice thoughts. So peak poses. Like I said, peak poses are still kind of optional, but it is a great way to build a sequence around a certain pose or muscle group. Next week and beyond, we'll get into theming a class so that we talk about how to build your theme with your peak pose and what themes go well with certain muscle groups and areas of your body. Okay? All right. So you have 2 of the 3 pages of the worksheets in the lesson today. I highly recommend looking at that worksheet. I'll probably actually post the full worksheet, which is the warm-up, the middle section, and the end, 3 pages, so that you can work through creating your own sequences. And if there's anything that would be more helpful on it, I did design it myself. So I've changed it up a little bit in time when I've started using it. So let me know if it's of help to you and if I could make any changes. I'm always looking for feedback. This is what this is for. This group is definitely for feedback and a lot of in this course as it develops. And you guys will have access later on as I put this into a new platform, probably on Teachable, and then I'll just put your emails in there so you can have it. I will refilm these videos. That will be for an actual course. But again, we're just working through this together to see if this sequencing is helping your home practice and helping you as a teacher. So let me know. I hope to check in with each of you this weekend, and I hope you have a great weekend. It's really nice and sunny out here, so I want to get outside again. That's where we're going to end in this peak pose practice and video, and I'll see you next time. I will be back Monday with another lesson talking about seated poses. I'm pretty sure seated poses, so we're getting towards the end of class, and I'd love to hear your favorite peak pose. So that's a post that I will put into the group at some point. I will ask what your favorite peak pose or peak poses are, something that you're working on, so that maybe I can help you guys develop your own classes or give you some suggestions. All right? Okay, so I'll talk to you next time. Have a super awesome day.